I'm Joanna Whitlock. I'm 68 years old, retired after 40 years of teaching English literature to teenagers who mostly pretended not to care about Shakespeare, but sometimes stayed after class to ask what quiet dignity really meant. I thought I knew. 3 days ago, I learned I didn't. It was snowing that morning, just lightly enough to be beautiful. Abigail had asked me to come spend the weekend at the old family farmhouse, the one Richard and I bought when she was 5. She said she missed me, that she wanted to honor the anniversary of her father's passing with something simple, just us. Her husband Miles picked me up in his SUV, smiling like always, polite like always, with that kind of expensive, professional charm that makes waitresses nervous and mothers suspicious. He brought my favorite coffee, said, "It's cold up there, Joanna." "You'll want something warm." I didn't think twice about the barn. Of course not. It had been part of the Whitlock family for over a century. I raised Abigail feeding horses in that barn. Richard proposed to me under its loft one September night. Every corner of it was memory. So when Miles opened the side door, waved me in and said, "We've kept it just the way you like it," I believed him. The scent hit me first. Not hay, not pine, gasoline. I turned, confused, but the door had already closed. Locked. I heard it. That sharp metal click that doesn't sound like much unless you're on the wrong side of it. I called out, "Miles?" Nothing. Just the wind pushing against the walls, just the creak of wood settling, and then just a whisper, muffled through the door. "Get warm." There was a pause. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps in snow retreating. Through the cracks in the barn wall, I saw the SUV. Abigail was behind the wheel. She wasn't looking back, not even pretending to be surprised. She was smiling. The flames started small, controlled, smart. They knew I'd panic, that I'd rush to the main door first, that I'd discover the lock too late, that I'd scream myself hoarse before realizing there was no cell signal, no escape, no one for Miles. And the irony, I had given them everything. After Richard passed, I didn't want the estate battles. I signed the transfer papers, gave them power of attorney just in case. I moved to a condo. Abigail said she wanted to start a family. Miles said he'd manage the assets responsibly. What they saw when they looked at me wasn't a mother. It was a dying obstacle between them and $500 million. But they didn't know about the tunnel. Richard was a paranoid romantic. After his cancer diagnosis, he'd rebuilt parts of the barn for emergency access. I had rolled my eyes then. "Who do you think we are, spies?" But he'd insisted. In the corner near the old grain chute, hidden behind 2 layers of paneling and a stack of fake firewood, was a trapdoor. By the time I made it there, the fire was louder than my thoughts. I opened it, dropped, and kept crawling. The smoke followed, but it didn't catch me. When I finally emerged, shivering, shaking, and covered in soot, I was halfway down the hill behind the barn, hidden by the snow and fog. Miles and Abigail were long gone, the SUV a dot on the white road. I watched it disappear through the trees, and I stood there, not crying, not screaming, just breathing. And that's when I knew. They thought they'd left me in a burning barn, but what they really did was light something in me that had long gone cold. Their goal? My $500 million inheritance. But when they returned, I was waiting, with something they never saw coming. If you're still here listening, you might already feel what I felt in that moment, the kind of silence that's louder than rage. If you've ever been left behind, underestimated, or quietly erased by the people you loved most, this story is for you. Stay with me. Because I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for something better. The last time Abigail called me just to talk was nearly a year ago, and even then it was about refinancing the farmhouse. So when her name lit up my phone that Thursday afternoon, I assumed something was wrong. The weather had turned bitter. the kind of cold that settled in your bones, whether you liked it or not. And I remember thinking, if she's calling, it must be serious. But her voice was warm, softer than usual, almost like when she was 12 and used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms. She said, "Hi, Mom. I've been thinking about you." I nearly dropped the mug I was rinsing. We talked for 11 minutes and 36 seconds. I remember because I stared at the call log afterward, rereading it like a poem I didn't quite understand. There was nothing overtly strange about the conversation, but something in her tone felt rehearsed, like each sentence had been polished before she spoke it. She asked how I was sleeping, how the new condo felt now that I'd been there a few months, whether I'd finally gotten used to using the elevator instead of the stairs. It was caring, gentle, but it was also the kind of conversation people have when they're looking for an opening, like tapping along the walls, searching for the hollow spot. And then she said, "I know this might be a little last minute, but we're thinking of doing something at the farmhouse this weekend. For Dad. It's been 3 years, and I just feel like we haven't honored him the right way." The words took a second to land. 3 years. 3 long, quiet years since Richard passed. He died in that same farmhouse upstairs, in the room with the slanted ceiling and the view of the western pasture. He'd insisted on staying there, said hospitals were for other people. I'd fed him broth in that bed, changed his sheets, held his hand when he stopped breathing. I was quiet for a beat too long because Abigail rushed to fill the silence. Miles thought it might be nice to just be together. Maybe light a fire, cook something. Nothing big, just us. We thought you could come Friday, stay the weekend. You can take your old room, or we can make up the guest house if that's better. She was offering options, comfort, safety. She was speaking in soft lowercase letters, and for a moment I let myself believe it was real, that my daughter had turned a corner, that she missed me, that the cold between us had thawed, even just a little. "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. She paused. "There's one other thing." I should have heard the warning then, that slight shift, the way her breath caught before she continued. She said, "It's not a big deal, but Miles and I were going over some of the paperwork the other night, after we finally closed on the Vermont property, and we realized there are still a few loose ends with the trust. From Dad. And from you, too. It's just, everything's still in both your names. The property, the accounts, even the foundation. We thought maybe this weekend, while you're here, we could sit down and simplify things, just to make it easier. Less confusing in case something ever happens." There it was. I stood there in my kitchen, hand resting on the counter, listening to my daughter use words like simplify and less confusing and in case something happens, and suddenly the warmth in her voice felt like a blanket laid over a trap door. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how. I thought about the binders in my closet, the ones Richard and I spent years assembling, the ones filled with passwords and legal documents and laminated copies of every will and tax return we'd ever signed. We were not careless people. We were prepared. Because life had taught us, especially Richard, that kindness doesn't keep the wolves at bay, but clarity sometimes does. "Okay," I said eventually. "We can talk about it." She sounded relieved. "Great. Thank you, Mom." I heard Miles in the background then, saying something I couldn't make out. Abigail lowered her voice and said, "Miles offered to come pick you up Friday morning, since it's supposed to snow. He thought it'd be easier. That word again. I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see it. "Tell him thank you," I said. "I'll be ready." We hung up shortly after that. She told me she loved me. I said it back. Then I stood there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, wondering what exactly had changed, wondering if the daughter I missed had come back or if she was just wearing a better mask. I went to the closet and pulled out one of the binders, flipped through the tabs like I had 100 times before. The trust, the land, the accounts. Everything was still intact. I closed the binder and held it in my arms like an old friend. Outside, snow had started to fall. Quiet and slow, the way it used to when Abigail was small and we'd sit by the window counting flakes until she fell asleep. I thought, maybe this weekend will be different. But something deep inside me, something cold and quiet, was already beginning to stir. The drive back to the farmhouse felt both familiar and unsettling, like revisiting a childhood home, only to find the trees trimmed, the porch repainted, and your favorite creaky step finally fixed. Miles insisted on driving, and I let him. Though the quiet between us stretched longer than the winding road, he filled the silence with small talk, weather, traffic, a new hiking trail Abigail liked. But there was something strained behind his politeness, a touch of overcompensation in the way he asked if I was warm enough, if I needed to stop for coffee, if the seat was too stiff. He called me Mom 3 times, and each time it felt like he was trying to convince himself more than me. When we finally turned onto the gravel driveway, my stomach tensed. The farmhouse stood at the top of the rise, just as it always had. Same gabled roof, same wraparound porch. But the trees lining the driveway had been cut back drastically. The swing set Richard built for Abigail had vanished. The barn, once red and weathered, had been given a fresh coat of white paint, almost too perfect, as if the place had been staged, not lived in. Miles slowed the car and said, "She's inside getting dinner ready. She'll be so glad to see you." But when I stepped out, the first face I saw wasn't Abigail's. It was a woman standing by the porch steps, wiping her hands on a linen apron. She had a kind of practiced cheer about her, like someone who'd learned how to smile without showing her teeth. Maybe early 50s, neat bun, expensive-looking shoes for a housekeeper. She greeted me with a bright, "Welcome, Mrs. Whitlock. I'm Teresa. I handle the house now. Handle the house now." As if the home I'd built, scrubbed and cried in, had become a project, a task to manage. Before I could reply, Abigail emerged from the front door. She looked polished. That's the only word I can think of. Her hair swept back, clothes tailored, not overdone, just curated. She walked toward me with a slow, deliberate pace, like we were acquaintances meeting at a charity gala rather than mother and daughter seeing each other for the first time in months. "Hi, Mom," she said, and gave me a light hug. Not tight, not long, just enough to say it happened. "You look well," I said, meaning it. "You too." "Teresa will show you to your room. Dinner's in an hour. We're doing a little celebration for Dad, a little celebration." I let her words settle in as Teresa reached for my overnight bag, but I gently took it from her. "I still remember where my room is," I said. She gave a quick, polite nod, then stepped aside. Inside the house, everything was different. Not wrong exactly, just unfamiliar. The wood floors had been buffed to a shine that felt unnatural. The walls, once painted warm yellows and soft creams, were now white with steel blue accents. The living room had been completely redecorated. Leather chairs, minimalist art, no photos of Richard, no knitted throws. Even the scent had changed. It used to be lemon oil and cedar wood. Now it was something crisp and cold, like eucalyptus and glass. I climbed the stairs slowly, my fingers trailing the banister. The gallery wall was gone. All those pictures of Abigail at various ages, missing teeth, graduation gown, her and Richard fishing at the lake, all taken down. In their place were framed botanical prints, generic, safe. When I reached what used to be my bedroom, I paused. It had been converted into a guest suite. Hotel neutral colors, king-size bed with too many pillows, a minibar. The quilt my mother made was gone. So was Richard's reading chair. Instead, a small seating area had been added in front of the window, complete with glossy travel magazines on the side table. I sat down on the edge of the bed, not quite knowing where to put my hands. This wasn't my home anymore. Not really. I got up and opened the closet, half expecting to find something of mine still there, a forgotten sweater, a pair of old boots. But it was empty except for thick padded hangers and a lavender sachet that smelled nothing like me. Back downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with quiet efficiency. Teresa moved through the space like she'd always belonged, and Miles was setting the table with precision. I hovered by the door for a moment, observing. Abigail was stirring something on the stove. She didn't look up. I said, "Where's the Dutch oven?" "The blue one. Richard always used it for stew." She turned, smiled faintly. "Oh, we donated a lot of the old stuff. It was time for an upgrade." "An upgrade?" I repeated, nodding slowly. Teresa brought over a tray of appetizers, goat cheese, crostini, something with fig jam. Not the kind of thing Abigail ever used to eat. I wandered into the study while they finished prepping. This had been Richard's domain. He'd insisted on keeping it cluttered. Books piled everywhere, maps pinned to the walls, a collection of old pocket watches in a glass case. Now it was sleek. A desk with no paper, shelves filled with matching hardcovers that looked unread. The pocket watches were gone. In their place sat a single sculpture, some abstract thing made of twisted metal, cold and jagged. I leaned down and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Empty. I tried the others. All empty. I closed them carefully, then walked back toward the hallway. As I passed the laundry room, I noticed something odd. A pile of neatly folded linens in a basket, all monogrammed. Not ours. They bore an unfamiliar crest, 2 letters entwined in gold thread. Back in the dining room, Miles had poured wine. Abigail lit candles. The table gleamed, set for 5 even though it would only be the 3 of us. I noticed the plates, fine bone china. Not the old stoneware we used for family dinners. The flatware was silver, not our mismatched stainless. Abigail looked up and caught me studying it. "We wanted things to feel elevated," she said. "Dad always said presentation mattered." He did say that, but not like this. We sat to eat and conversation was light, hollow. Miles told a story about a new investor. Abigail asked if I'd been doing any reading lately. I mentioned a novel Richard had loved. She didn't remember it. Teresa moved quietly in and out, clearing plates, pouring drinks. At one point, she looked at me a moment too long, as if trying to say something without speaking. I held her gaze for a second before she turned away. After dessert, Abigail stood and said, "We'll go through the paperwork tomorrow." Miles already pulled the files. I nodded. "I'd like to see what he found." She smiled thinly. "Of course." That night, I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. Everything around me looked beautiful, expensive, refined, but it didn't smell like home, and it didn't feel like love. The next morning arrived with a strange sort of stillness. Not quiet, but stilled, like the moment before a storm when the wind holds its breath. I dressed slowly, choosing a thick cardigan and the pearl earrings Richard had gifted me on our 20th anniversary. It was silly, perhaps, but I needed something of him near me, something real. When I came downstairs, Miles was already seated in the sunroom with a folder open in front of him and 2 mugs of coffee on the side table. He smiled when he saw me, all teeth and charm. "Morning, Mom," he said cheerfully. "Sleep well." "I did, thank you," I replied, though we both knew it was a lie. He gestured toward the armchair opposite him. "Join me. Abigail's on a call with the foundation, but she'll be down in a bit." I sat, my eyes drifting to the folder on his lap. It wasn't thick, but it was official. Paper with weight, corners sharp. The kind of folder that holds words meant to last longer than trust. Miles handed me my coffee, then leaned forward. "So," he said, adopting a gentle tone I'd heard doctors use with the elderly. "I wanted to bring up something before we start going over Dad's trust paperwork. It's just a precaution." Really? I didn't answer. I waited. He opened the folder and pulled out a document. This is a limited power of attorney, he explained, placing it carefully on the side table between us. It's temporary. It's just, well, after the fall you had in January, Abigail and I were both a little worried. You said you hit your head, right? Yes, I said. Mild concussion. I was cleared in 2 days. Of course, he said quickly, and we're not questioning that. It's just, well, memory loss can sneak up on people, especially after a head injury. We've been reading about how important it is to have a safety net in place in case you know, if something ever happened and you couldn't make decisions yourself. He slid the document a few inches closer. This just lets Abigail act in your interest temporarily. Financial, mostly. Nothing drastic. It would only activate under medical confirmation, and it expires automatically in 6 months. He smiled again, as if he were offering me a cookie. Just a small protection for you, he added. I picked up the paper slowly. It was dense, legal language swimming in a sea of confidence. But one clause caught my eye, even through the fog of jargon. In the event of cognitive decline or mental incapacitation as certified by a licensed physician, the appointed party shall obtain control of financial assets and estate planning privileges, including but not limited to banking, real estate, and trust documentation. My heart gave a small thud. I looked up at Miles, who was watching me carefully. "You've been busy," I said, folding the paper neatly. He gave a light chuckle. "Prepared. Abigail's always been a planner, you know that, and she just wants to make sure no one takes advantage of you." "She's not worried that you might?" His expression flickered, just for a moment. Then he shook his head with that infuriating, polished laugh. "You're funny, Joanna." Always sharp, he handed me a pen. I held it, turning it between my fingers like a knife too dull to cut, but too shiny to ignore. "Let me read this more carefully later today," I said. "My eyesight's not what it used to be." He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." "Take your time," I stood, placing the paper back in the folder, but not before slipping a second folded copy, the one he'd set underneath, into the inner pocket of my cardigan. He didn't see. He was too busy sipping his coffee and pretending not to push. In the kitchen, I found Teresa rinsing dishes. She looked up briefly, then returned to her work. "Do you know a good notary around here?" I asked casually. She paused for just a breath too long. "There's one in town." Next to the florist, I nodded, as if I'd only asked out of curiosity, but her reaction told me enough. Later, alone in my room, I pulled out the copy and laid it across the bed. It was all there, plain as day. With one signature, they could begin moving things around if I ever so much as forgot where I put my keys. This wasn't about caution. It was about control. Control cloaked in concern, wrapped in soft voices and firm language. Abigail and Miles weren't waiting for me to become unwell. They were preparing for it, maybe even hoping. I stared at the line where my signature was meant to go. Then I took out a blank sheet of paper, practiced the way I'd sign it, slowly, carefully. And when dinner came, I brought down the copy Miles had shown me, forged my own version of a signature, just off, enough not to hold in court, and returned it to the folder. "Thanks," I told him. "You were right to think ahead." He smiled again, relief flooding his features. But upstairs, in the lining of my suitcase, the real document was tucked between 2 sweaters. And now I knew. This wasn't just about the house, or even the trust. This was about erasing me before I had the chance to speak, and that was a mistake. The day started colder than usual, the kind of chill that settles into the marrow of your bones long before you step outside. The fog hadn't yet lifted from the fields, and the trees stood bare against a sky that didn't look sure of itself. Miles knocked on my door just after breakfast. His voice was cheerful but a little too rehearsed. "Morning, Mom." "Got a minute?" I need a second pair of eyes. I looked up from the photo album I was pretending to enjoy. For what? There's something odd going on with the wiring in the old barn. Might be nothing, but the motion sensor lights keep flickering. Figured I'd check it out before calling an electrician. Come with? He smiled like it was a picnic invitation. The barn. The old one, not the one used for tools or storing Abigail's riding gear. The one Richard and I had sealed up almost 15 years ago when it started to rot at the base. The one with the sunken roofline and the forgotten past. Why now? Still, I nodded. Let me grab a scarf. The wind bit harder once we stepped outside. As we made our way across the cracked path, I noticed how Miles glanced at his watch, twice in 1 minute. He didn't speak much, just kept his eyes forward. He opened the rusted latch with the kind of precision that made me pause. Had he oiled it ahead of time? The inside smelled like old earth and dried hay. Dust danced in shafts of pale light coming through the gaps in the wooden panels. Miles pointed to the far side of the barn, near where a stack of broken crates and bales of straw leaned precariously. There. I think something sparked near that junction box. He gestured but didn't step in. I walked forward slowly, my boots crunching on the uneven floorboards. As I leaned in to look, something pricked at my spine. Instinct, perhaps. I turned just in time to see the doors swing shut. The latch clamped. Click. "Miles?" I called. Nothing. I ran to the door and pulled. Locked. From the outside, I pounded against the wood. "Miles, open this!" Silence. Then from the corner of the barn, a soft hiss, the straw. It wasn't just dry, it had been doused. The sharp, acrid scent of gasoline hit me full force now, masked until the air began to shift. And then, I saw it. A small flame, no larger than a match head, licking its way up the corner bale. No smoke yet, but it was coming. I ran to the opposite side, tugging at the old side door. Bolted. I kicked at it. Nothing gave. Panic clawed its way up my throat, but I forced it down. Think, Joanna. The barn. Richard's barn. And then I remembered. The Cold War tunnel. Richard had once shown me a narrow crawl space he'd reinforced years ago, just in case, he'd said. In case of what? Nuclear fallout? Invaders? No one had touched it since, but he'd refused to let it be filled in. I dropped to my knees and scrambled behind the wooden feed bins. The floorboards there had always been slightly uneven. I ran my hands along the base, fingers catching on a recessed latch. I yanked. Dust flew, and a small panel lifted with a groan. A tight shaft of blackness stared back at me. The tunnel. I didn't hesitate. The heat was already pressing against my back, and the smoke had begun to form thin ribbons in the upper rafters. I lowered myself in, feet first, and felt the cool dirt enclose around me. It was narrow. Too narrow for a suitcase, but just wide enough for me to shuffle forward on my hands and knees. The air smelled of damp earth and rusted tools. I kept moving, trying not to picture flames curling their way through the barn behind me, trying not to think about what had just been done to me by my own family. The crawl felt endless. But then I saw it. Light, a sliver, faint bluish gray. I reached the end of the tunnel where another latch waited just above a slope of gravel. I pushed, slowly, carefully, until it cracked open with a cold gust. It was the old woodshed, half collapsed and hidden behind overgrown vines, the same one Richard had once used to store extra fencing. I emerged covered in dirt, heart thudding like a drum. The fire was now visible through the trees, thin smoke rising in streams above the roofline. I listened for sirens. None. No neighbors. No rush to rescue. They weren't planning to save me. I dusted off my coat and turned toward the field, but then I stopped. Someone was there, standing at the edge of the thicket, watching me. For a moment, I couldn't tell who it was. Just a silhouette. Tall, still. But then they stepped forward, and I froze. It wasn't Abigail, and it wasn't Miles. It was someone I hadn't seen in years. Someone I thought had disappeared from this story long ago. They said one word, quiet, steady, Joanna. And everything inside me shifted, because whatever I thought I understood about what was happening was only the beginning. I must have blacked out for a minute after crawling through the hatch. The cold dirt beneath me was real, grounding. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the woodshed anymore. I was wrapped in a wool blanket, lying on a cot inside a warm, dimly lit cabin. There was a faint smell of pine and coffee, and an old cast-iron stove clicked and creaked in the corner as it gave off its slow heat. A figure sat nearby in a rocking chair, thumbing through an old paperback. I blinked. He looked up. "Well, about time," he said, setting the book on the table. "Thought I'd lost you for a second there." It took me a moment. The beard was grayer, the frame thinner, but the eyes were unmistakable. Walter. He smiled like an old dog finally recognized. Still sharp as a whip. "Good. Where? How?" "I was checking the tunnel," he said simply. "Routine maintenance. Found you coming out half crawling, covered in smoke and looking like you'd seen hell. Figured something bad went down." I sat up slowly. My body ached. My knees throbbed from the crawl and my lungs still stung from the smoke. But I was alive. More than that, I was somewhere safe. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, I could breathe. Walter poured coffee into a tin mug and handed it to me without a word. I took it gratefully, holding it with both hands, letting the warmth seep through. He settled back in his chair. "You want to tell me what they tried to do to you?" I told him everything, from Abigail's sweet call to Miles' power of attorney papers, to the locked barn and the smell of gasoline in the hay. I spoke slowly, my voice steadier than I expected, each word sharper now that I had some distance from the nightmare. Walter didn't interrupt. He just listened, his hands folded across his stomach, the firelight casting shadows on his weathered face. When I finished, he nodded once. "Thought so." "You thought so?" "I smelled it too," he said. "The smoke." "That wasn't no electrical fire, Joanna. That was lit from the ground up. Accelerant, intentional, and by the timing of it, they were betting on it being fatal." My hands tightened around the mug. "You're sure?" "I spent 30 years running into burning buildings. I can tell the difference between a fault and a setup." His voice didn't rise, didn't tremble, just the solid certainty of someone who had seen too much to be shaken anymore. I looked at him, really looked at him. "Why were you even in the tunnel?" He gave a half smile. "Your husband made me promise I'd check it every month. Said it was too old, too hidden to be trusted. Even left me the keys to both ends before he passed. Figured if anything ever happened to you, I should be ready." I swallowed hard. "He told you that?" "Every word." Silence settled for a moment. Then I looked around the cabin. It hadn't changed much since the last time I'd visited, years ago. Still cluttered but cozy, still smelling of cedar and pipe tobacco. "You've been here all this time?" "Retired, mostly. Don't need much, but I kept one eye on the world. And on you," he paused, then added gently. "Knew something was off the second Abigail started showing up at town hall meetings, asking about land zoning and ownership records. Didn't seem like the grieving daughter type." I set the mug down, the old floorboards creaking under my feet as I stood. My knees wobbled, but I steadied myself. "Walter, they're trying to paint me as mentally declining. They need me out of the way. They need your signature more like," he said, "or they need enough evidence to prove you're incompetent. Which means if I disappear," he nodded slowly, "your assets freeze. They file for emergency guardianship. Then it's theirs." I paced to the window, looked out into the trees. It was quiet here, peaceful, a perfect hiding place. But my world wasn't in the trees. It was back at that house. My name was on those deeds. My life was in every beam and photo they tried to erase. "They think I'm gone," I said. Good, Walter replied. That gives you a head start. A head start for what? He stood now, too, crossed to a drawer and pulled out a thick file. Richard left this with me, too. Said if he ever couldn't protect you, this would. Legal backups, copies of all property titles, medical evaluations, real ones, even an audio recording of your last estate planning meeting, all dated, all notarized. I stared at the file. Why didn't he tell me? He thought you'd never need it. Walter's voice softened, but he also knew the family had cracks. He saw it. He just didn't want to believe it'd get this dark. I felt my throat tighten. I turned away, pretending to look at the fireplace, but really just needing to breathe. You're safe here for now, he said. But if you want to fight this, we'll need to move smart. Quiet. Precise. I looked over my shoulder at him. We? He smiled again, slower this time. I may be old, but I still remember how to run a hose and read a legal record, and I don't like seeing people burned. Not literally, not legally, I sat back down, and for the first time since that call from Abigail, I felt the ground beneath me stop shaking, not because the danger was gone, but because I had someone standing beside me again. There are things I never thought I'd witness in my lifetime, least of all, my own funeral. I stood beneath the old oak at the back of St. Marin's Cemetery, the wind catching the hem of my coat, my hat pulled low. From this distance, the world looked like a painting. Muted colors, soft edges, people moving in slow motion, like none of it was real. But it was. The silver casket gleamed under the gray sky, draped with white lilies. That was Richard's doing. He'd always said lilies were for beginnings, not endings. The irony didn't escape me. Abigail stood at the front, a handkerchief pressed to her cheek, her black dress tailored and spotless. Beside her, Miles wore somber gray, arm wrapped around her waist. They made quite the picture. Grieving daughter, dutiful son-in-law. The performance was flawless, but it was just that, a performance. I watched as people I'd known for decades came forward to lay flowers. Marion from the Historical Society, Eli from the bookstore, even old Mr. Rafferty, who once chased me off his porch for walking across his lawn when I was 7. They were crying, real tears, eyes red, noses pink, shoulders trembling. They thought I was gone. They believed I'd been lost in a fire. And the cruelest part? It was easier for them to believe it than to question what really happened. Walter stood silently beside me, hands folded behind his back. He didn't try to make small talk. He knew this wasn't a moment for words, until he finally said, almost to himself, "Only those who've truly lost something understand what it means to protect what matters." I nodded slowly, still watching the scene below. It wasn't just the act that sickened me, it was the subtlety of it. Abigail wasn't overacting. She didn't wail or collapse or demand attention. No, she let the silence speak. She dabbed her eyes with delicate precision. She offered whispered thanks to mourners. She looked, for all the world, like a daughter overcome with grief. But I knew better. Because 3 years ago, when her father passed, she didn't cry. She didn't even look up when the will was read. I remembered thinking at the time maybe that was just her way, that some people mourn privately, quietly, but now I see it wasn't mourning at all. It was calculation, a rehearsal for today. Miles stepped forward, taking the podium. His voice was smooth, warm, tinged with the right notes of sorrow. Joanna Whitlock was not just a mother to Abigail, he began. She was the very soul of our family. I flinched. He had no right. She taught us strength, compassion, dignity. She built a legacy not just of wealth, but of wisdom. And now you're stealing it, I thought bitterly. I wanted to scream, to run down the hill and tear the microphone from his hand and shout, "I'm still here. I'm not dead." But I didn't. I stayed still, rooted, because this wasn't the time. Let them bury the lie. Let them build their castle of deceit, brick by brick. All they were doing was giving me the space I needed to move freely, to plan, to reclaim. Walter finally turned to me. "You sure you're ready for this?" I looked at him. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We stayed until the casket was lowered, until the crowd began to thin, until Abigail placed one final lily on top and walked away without looking back. I memorized every step she took, because one day soon I'd make sure she took them again, only this time, toward her reckoning. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I wouldn't need to beg for truth. I'd simply show them what it looked like. Walter's cabin smelled of cedar, coffee, and sawdust, a strange combination that had become oddly comforting. I sat at the worn wooden table, a legal pad in front of me, lines scrawled with questions I still didn't have answers to. Who forged the new documents? How did they access my legal files? Who else was involved? And the biggest one, how do I prove I'm not dead without exposing myself too early? That's when Walter said he had someone in mind. She's quiet, smart, keeps no digital footprint, doesn't trust banks, thinks the government's watching her microwave. But when it comes to unraveling financial lies, she's a bloodhound. An hour later, I heard a truck rumble up the gravel road. The door opened and in walked a woman about 40, short purple hair under a knitted beanie, combat boots dusted with red clay. Her jacket was covered in patches from obscure tech conferences. "Joanna, meet Connie," Walter said simply. Connie dropped her duffel with a thud and glanced at me. "You're the dead billionaire." I nodded. "Apparently." She pulled a laptop from her bag like a magician revealing a trick. "Let's see how alive your money is." I didn't ask how she got a signal or why her laptop was covered in aluminum foil lining. I just watched. Within 20 minutes, she had accessed 3 encrypted directories I hadn't known existed, each one holding data related to Whitlock Holdings, the trust Richard and I had built together over 40 years. "They filed a revision to the master trust 3 days before your accident," she said, her eyes skimming rapidly. "It's clean." On the surface, "Define clean," I murmured. "Everything matches. Headers, barcodes, digital seals. Except this." She spun the laptop around. I saw it instantly. My name, Joanna M. Whitlock. Only, it wasn't my signature. It was close, eerily close. But Richard had always joked that my W looked like a tightrope walker, falling backward. The one on the screen didn't have the sharp curve I'd always made under pressure. "Someone practiced," I whispered. Connie nodded. "And they printed it with an inkjet on bonded paper, which makes it look like it was wet signed. A lot of high net worth clients still insist on handwritten wills. It's easier to fake because no one expects old school fraud." I felt my stomach twist. "It's been submitted to 4 banks already," she continued. "And get this, Miles filed a motion to consolidate the remaining estate into a private holding company. He named himself and Abigail as acting directors. Without probate?" I asked, stunned. He presented the new will. "There's a clause stating that in the event of your sudden absence, they assume interim control. Your original will didn't include that phrase." Of course it didn't. I'd made sure of it. Walter leaned forward. "So we can prove this is forged." "Not easily," Connie said. "But there's a gap." She tapped the timestamp. The revised will was notarized at 3:41 p.m. on a Friday. I blinked. I was at the county clerk's office that afternoon. "I renewed the land exemption on the orchard plots. And unless you can teleport," she said with a smirk, "you couldn't have been 2 places at once." My mind began to race. That was something. Not conclusive proof, but a hole, a seam. "If we can get the clerk to verify your presence, maybe even footage, they'll say it was post-dated," Walter warned. "Unless I use it first," I said quietly. They both turned to me. If I submit a legal request for video footage as the executor of the original will, claiming I suspect fraud, I don't have to identify myself as Joanna. I just need a lawyer willing to sign under seal risky, Connie said, but clever. Walter smiled faintly. She was married to Richard Whitlock, remember? Half of her brain is a legal labyrinth. I didn't smile. None of this felt victorious. Not yet. Because while we were digging through digital ghosts, Abigail and Miles were moving in the real world, signing documents, taking over assets, maybe even planning their next erasure. Let's find out where the money is going, I said. If they're consolidating assets, it has to land somewhere, some account, some shell company. Connie cracked her knuckles. Time to follow the wires. And so began our hunt, not just for truth, but for proof. Not just for justice, but for precision, because surviving the fire was only the beginning. What came next had to be undeniable, unmistakable, and absolutely bulletproof. The plan was simple. Break in, grab the fireproof lockbox from the upstairs study, and get out before anyone knew I had been there. Connie had disabled the outer perimeter motion sensors, at least the ones she could detect. Walter waited in the woods just beyond the back fence, binoculars in hand, radio in his coat pocket. The night air pressed in thick and heavy as I moved across the gravel path toward the side entry. That door had a loose hinge since 2009. It still hadn't been fixed. I jimmied it open, using the old trick I'd learned from Richard back when we used to sneak in after wine tastings, giggling like teenagers. Inside, the air was colder than I remembered. Or maybe it was just me. The hallway looked sterile, too clean, stripped of the warmth I had built over decades. Paintings were gone. Photos, too. No portrait of my mother. No hand-drawn map of the orchard Richard used to keep tacked by the pantry. I moved fast, my footsteps light on the polished hardwood. My target was the third-floor study, what had once been Richard's safe room. It was behind a false bookshelf, locked with a fingerprint panel only I could activate, or so I thought. But halfway up the second-floor landing, I stopped cold. A sound, small, soft, wet, crying, the unmistakable cry of a baby. At first I thought I imagined it, a memory perhaps, a phantom sound born from years of dreams unfulfilled. But then I heard it again, wailing, muffled, fragile, real. My hand gripped the banister so tight I could feel the splinters pressing into my palm. Abigail never mentioned a child, not to me, not in any of her sterile holiday letters or clipped phone calls. She hated noise, hated mess, said motherhood would destroy her interior peace. Her words, not mine. And yet the cry came again, closer from the nursery that had stayed, locked since Richard died. I'd never changed it. Somehow, I couldn't. The old crib had remained as it was, empty, untouched, a shrine to a dream that never came true. But the door was ajar now, and a low light spilled through the crack. I pushed it open slowly. There, in the center of the room, was a new crib, sleek, modern, absurdly expensive by the looks of it. Inside, swaddled in soft gray blankets, was a baby, no older than a few weeks, eyes wide, fists clenched, mouth trembling from the recent effort of crying. On the table nearby, formula bottles, designer diaper bags, a monitor still blinking. I stepped closer, heart hammering. A photo frame sat beside the bottle warmer. Abigail, Miles, the baby, a perfectly framed family. My knees buckled slightly and I sat in the old rocking chair before I collapsed. A child, my grandchild, and I hadn't even known. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my small camera, took 2 pictures, then a third, the photo frame, the crib, the monitor logs on the wall. Proof. But none of it made sense. Abigail had told me she was done. Children are shackles, she'd once spat during an argument when I asked about grandkids. The world is overpopulated. I'd rather raise portfolios than people, so why this? I leaned over the crib and gently ran a finger across the baby's tiny hand. The baby curled its fingers around mine. Not a dream, not a lie. Real. The sound of a door downstairs slammed. I jerked back, heart racing. Voices, Abigail and someone else. I didn't wait. Slipping out of the nursery, I crept along the hallway toward the attic stairs instead of going back down. The attic had a forgotten crawl space that led to the northern edge of the house, near a loose panel on the roof. I could make it. I had to. As I climbed the narrow ladder, I caught a piece of their conversation. "Make sure no one hears the baby tonight," Abigail said sharply. "We can't have another report." "We're covering it," Miles replied. "The pediatrician signed the NDA. Stop panicking." I paused. Another report? NDA? Was this child being hidden? Used? For what? I barely breathed as I pushed into the attic, heart pounding in my chest, head swirling. Was this why they rushed the new will? Because of the baby? Were they creating a new heir? Trying to cement legitimacy through lineage? And then a more horrifying thought settled in. Was this baby even Abigail's? Or was this child brought in, bought, adopted, stolen, for the sake of appearances? I didn't know. But I had seen enough to know the stakes were far higher than property or prestige. This wasn't just about my money. This was about blood, about identity, about rewriting legacy. I found the loose panel and slipped out onto the roof under the veil of night. Walter's flashlight blinked twice in the woods. Time to go. As I climbed down the trellis, I tucked the photos into my coat and whispered to myself, "You poor child. Didn't choose this world, but I won't let them twist you into a lie." That baby wasn't just an innocent life. That baby was a time bomb. And now I had the clock ticking in my hand. I waited until just after noon, when the household help typically rotated shifts and the property's perimeter sensors reset. Walter dropped me 2 blocks from the back gate. I wore the gardener's uniform we borrowed from an old friend of his who used to work here. Same hat, same faded gloves. From a distance, I looked like any contractor doing weekend work. Grace would be in the garden. She always took the baby out for sun at noon. Not too much light, she once told someone at a brunch, just enough to remind him the world is bigger than 4 nursery walls. She was standing near the rose trellis when I saw her, tall, slender, no older than 30, hair pulled back tight. Her eyes scanned constantly like she expected the wind to carry secrets. I waited until she was alone, adjusting the canopy shade. Then I stepped forward. "Grace," I said gently. She turned, startled. The color drained from her face. She dropped the bottle in her hand, the milk splattering on her white sneakers. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Oh my, no, you're not, how—" "I'm not a ghost," I said. "I'm very much alive. But we don't have much time." She stepped back instinctively, hand reaching for the baby monitor clipped to her waist. "Please," I added, "don't call them. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want the truth." "The truth about what?" she whispered, still pale. "They said you died. That you burned in the barn?" I finished for her. "Yes, that's what they wanted everyone to believe." I reached into my pocket and handed her a photo. One of the documents Connie had traced from the hospital database. Surrogacy contracts, medical transfers, hidden under Abigail's name. But the egg donor, the biological mother, wasn't Abigail. Grace took the paper with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned it slowly. I saw her lips move as she read the names. Then she sat down hard on the garden bench, cradling the baby tighter. "It's real," she whispered. "I knew something was off, but I didn't think it was this." I knelt in front of her. "I need to know who this baby really is, Grace." She looked at me, eyes welling. "You loved Richard Whitlock, didn't you?" I blinked. "He was my husband. I mean, deeply. Not just out of duty. The kind of love that still makes a woman sleep with the window cracked just to hear the trees the way he liked them. I smiled faintly. Yes, I did. She took a long breath. Then you deserve to know what they did to his legacy. She looked down at the baby, who now stirred gently in her arms. This baby, she began, his name is Isaac. But that's not the name on the paperwork Abigail filed. On those, he's listed as Whitlock Jr. No first. Name. She told me it was a naming surprise for the press, a PR move. But this baby wasn't born to Abigail. She never carried. I suspected as much from her mood swings, too controlled, no weight change, and the timeline, it never matched. So I checked the formula schedules, the hospital ID bands, everything, and then I found a photo hidden in a drawer. A woman, young, thin, crying, holding this baby right after delivery. Who was she? Grace hesitated. The name was partially smudged, but I searched through the contract reference numbers. It led to a file, archived under a sealed surrogate agreement. The biological mother was named Isabel Calder. My breath caught in my chest. Isabel, my sister's daughter. She had disappeared 2 years ago. We all thought she was in Europe. She sent occasional emails, short, vague, but I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know where to look. Isabel was forced into it, wasn't she? I said softly. Grace nodded. Yes, I think she was told this would secure her student loans, that Abigail would take care of everything. But from what I read, she signed under pressure. She didn't know the inheritance implications or the legal transfers, and after the birth, she vanished from the system. I closed my eyes, my hand reaching out to gently touch the baby's blanket. My great-nephew, I murmured, born into a lie. Grace looked down at Isaac. He's a sweet baby, she whispered. Doesn't fuss much. Loves wine chimes and the smell of mint. I try to take him to the herb garden. It calms him. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. You're brave for telling me this, Grace. No, I'm just tired of watching them shape this child into a pawn, she said. He deserves better. I'll make sure he gets it. She hesitated. Will you take him away? Not yet, I said. First we gather the truth, then we make it count. She looked relieved. Then she handed me something, a small USB stick hidden in her apron pocket. It has everything I could gather, she said. Scans, photos, documents, and a video clip. Isabel, right after delivery. Crying, I took it, my hand brushing hers. You've done something extraordinary today. Grace looked at the baby, then back at me. Please make it mean something. I nodded. It already does. 3 days later, I sat in Walter's cabin, the fire crackling low, while Connie paced with her laptop open. Her fingers flew over the keyboard like a pianist hitting a final crescendo. She hadn't spoken in a while, not since muttering something about tracing federal marriage records. The silence stretched until she suddenly stopped, stared at the screen, and said, I got him. I leaned forward. Who? Miles, she said, her voice cold and flat. Or rather, Emerson Calhoun. That's his legal name. Or one of them. Anyway, the blood drained from my face. He changed his name. Multiple times, she replied, and always right before he moved states or got married. But here's where it gets sick. He's not just a manipulative son-in-law, he's a professional, a predator, a man who's done this 3 times before, at least. She turned the screen toward me. I saw mugshots, court dockets, old wedding announcements with different last names, Emerson Calhoun, Ethan Myers, Martin Keene, each one followed by lawsuits or sealed court settlements. 3 different women, Connie continued, all of them older, all wealthy, each one dead within 2 years of marriage, each estate contested, and in all 3 cases, the family was pushed out of the picture. Sounds familiar? I clutched the edge of the table. And the authorities didn't connect the dots? They tried. but he never stayed long in one place, and each death had a tidy explanation: stroke, fall, heart failure. Nothing obvious, but it's his financial trail that gave him away. He always moved money in the same pattern: offshore holding, then small business ventures, and finally legal trusts assigned to his new wife or child. My stomach churned. He's planning the same thing here. With Abigail, with the baby, Connie nodded grimly. He's used your daughter as cover. But she might not even be the one holding the strings anymore. From what I can see, he shifted most of the estate, your estate, into a new shell corporation under the name Calhoun Family Holdings. It didn't exist 2 months ago. Now it owns the farm, your mineral rights, and all of Whitlock's philanthropic funds. I couldn't breathe. Everything Richard and I had built, miles of pasture, the trust we founded for veterans, the land conservation plots we donated, all absorbed like water into a sponge. Walter stood up, his brow furrowed. We need to bring this to someone. Connie shook her head. Not yet. He's got lawyers in 3 states, and he's careful. If we go too soon, he'll vanish. Again. He knows how to scrub his tracks. I felt something inside me shift, the kind of cold resolve that forms when grief gives way to purpose. What about the women before? I asked. Are any of their families still around? Connie nodded slowly. One, a niece in Colorado. Her aunt, Margaret Denning, died mysteriously after marrying a man named Ethan Myers. Took him less than 8 months to get control of her vineyard estate. The niece tried to sue for fraud, but the court dismissed the case. I can reach out to her, see if she's willing to talk. I stared at the screen again, at the photo of the man I'd welcomed into my family, who held my hand and called me Mom, who smiled when he poured me tea on Sunday mornings. He was smiling in the mugshot, too, like it was all a game. He never loved Abigail, I said aloud, more to myself than anyone. He studied her. Used. Her. Just like the others, Connie pointed to a highlighted section on the screen. He didn't even meet her by accident. According to this background report, he applied for a job at the same real estate firm she interned at, a job he was grossly overqualified for. My guess? He learned everything about the Whitlock family from her social media trail. He targeted her, I whispered. Walter shook his head in disbelief. Sick bastard. And the baby? I asked. Is he trying to set the boy up as some sort of insurance? Connie didn't answer right away. Then she said, yes. Think about it. If anything happened to Abigail, or if she got suspicious, he could still control everything through the child, especially if the child's legal documents say he's the sole guardian, which from what I found might be the case already. I closed my eyes. I thought the worst had already happened. It hasn't, Connie said softly, but it will. Unless we get ahead of him. There was a long silence. Then Walter asked, so what's our move? Connie cracked her knuckles. I'm going to pull everything I can from the Calhoun Holdings entity. If I can get access to the back end, I might be able to locate his next financial transfer. That'll give us jurisdiction. And me? I asked. You, she said, are going to help me find Margaret Denning's niece. If we can show a pattern of behavior, and we document what he's done with your estate, it won't just be fraud. It'll be premeditated financial abuse. I felt the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. The betrayal, the lies, the cold orchestration behind every soft-spoken dinner, every compliment, every word Miles had ever said to me, designed, measured, weaponized. But now I knew who he was. Not just a manipulator, a collector of women, of wealth, of legacies not his to touch. I stood slowly. If we're going to stop him, I said, we need to make sure he doesn't just lose the money. Walter looked up. What do you mean? I met his gaze, unwavering. I mean, he needs to lose everything he thinks he's untouchable from. The cabin was quiet again, after a long afternoon of voices and plans and truth, too heavy for air. Grace had gone into town to pick up formula and a warmer blanket, promising she'd be quick. Walter was chopping firewood out back, giving me space. And I was alone with him, the baby, Henry Jude. He was lying in a little makeshift crib by the fireplace, wrapped in one of Walter's soft flannel shirts. His eyes fluttered open every now and then, as if checking to make sure someone was still close, still watching over him. I had pulled a wooden chair close to him, rocking it gently with one heel on the floor. My hands, once steady from decades of cooking and cleaning and gardening, now trembled as I reached down and lifted him into my arms. He didn't cry. He didn't fuss. He just looked at me. Round, blinking eyes that carried no suspicion, no history, no hurt, only the softness of beginning. I cradled him close, breathing in that unmistakable scent only babies have, like milk and sunshine and something new. I could feel the weight of him, not heavy, but real, alive, breathing, warm. I hadn't held a baby in decades, not since Abigail was little, not since I used to sit in our old porch rocker, watching the sunrise as I nursed her, humming the same lullabies my mother once sang to me. One of them came to me now, uninvited, rising from the depths of a memory I hadn't touched in years. My voice was barely more than a whisper, but the melody felt familiar in my mouth. Golden slumbers kiss your eyes, smiles await you when you rise. Henry blinked, his tiny fingers curling in the air before brushing against my collarbone. I shifted slightly so he could feel my heartbeat against his cheek. He yawned, a wide-open motion, like a tiny lion cub, and then those fingers found my own. He latched onto my pinky with a surprising strength, holding on like he knew I needed anchoring. The song faltered on my lips. I stared down at him, at the softness of his cheeks, at the breath moving through him, steady and sure. And I wept, not with fury, not with betrayal, not even with sorrow anymore. The tears came because something in me cracked open, not from pain but from presence, from the simple, irrefutable truth that in all the chaos, all the fire, all the lies and schemes and heartbreaks, something pure had survived. He was here, and I was here. And for this moment, that was enough. I pressed my lips gently to the crown of his head, inhaling deeply like I could hold on to this second forever. Henry stirred but didn't wake. His fist was still wrapped around my finger, refusing to let go. I thought of Abigail, how small she'd once been, how fiercely I'd loved her, how much of myself I'd poured into raising her. Somewhere along the way, something shifted, and I spent years trying to understand what I'd done wrong, how love could warp into resentment, how silence built walls between people who once shared everything. But Henry, he didn't know any of that. He didn't know what had been taken, or faked, or manipulated. He only knew warmth, and a heartbeat, and a song. I rocked him gently, the chair creaking in rhythm with my breathing. Outside, the wind picked up through the trees, rustling branches like a lullaby of its own. The fire cracked, sending little embers dancing up the chimney. And inside that cabin, something in me, some part I thought had gone cold, was waking up, not in rage, but in something gentler. I looked down again. His eyelashes had settled. His mouth made a faint suckling motion in sleep. And still, his little hand clutched mine. All the money in the world, all the acres of land, all the trusts and properties and signatures, none of it could replace this moment, this connection. I wasn't crying anymore. I was simply breathing with him. There was no strategy here, no revenge, no fear, just breath and skin. And a boy named Henry Jude, who had no idea how many battles were being fought around him, who didn't know he had been used as a pawn by people who saw inheritance before humanity, who had no clue he had become the centerpiece of someone else's empire. He was just a baby. But to me, right now, he was the only real thing left in the world. When Grace returned, arms full of bags and cheeks red from the cold, she opened the door gently and paused in the threshold. Her eyes met mine, and I think she saw the tears still drying on my cheeks. She didn't say a word, just gave me a small, almost reverent nod. She knew, and I knew too. Not everything needed an answer yet. Not every war had to be won with fire. Some things could be reclaimed quietly, by simply holding on. I had never thought revenge would come to me in such a quiet, strategic way. I always imagined vengeance as loud, dramatic, violent even. But the kind of revenge I was about to craft didn't need noise. It needed precision. It needed patience. And it needed the same stage where it all began, the barn. Walter stood at the table in the cabin, laying out schematics he had drawn from memory. Every floorboard, every window, the underground tunnel's current layout. He marked the spots for camera placements, angles of coverage, and hiding locations. Connie was typing rapidly, linking into a secured stream that would connect directly to a digital folder already shared with a contact in the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I watched them both work with the kind of focus you'd expect from soldiers, not survivors, and yet here we were. "You're sure she'll come?" Walter asked, eyes still scanning his notes. I nodded, the envelope in my hand already sealed with the ink barely dry. She's greedy. But more than that, she's curious. She'll want to know if I've left anything behind, if there's still a chance to erase the trail, and what exactly did you write? Connie glanced at me without stopping her keystrokes. I tapped the envelope once and slid it across the table. Just this: meet me at the barn. One last memory. One last choice. That's all. Walter gave a slow, approving nod. You used her own sentimentality against her. She never had any, I replied, but she thinks I do. That night, I returned briefly to town, cloaked and careful, using one of Walter's old hats and Connie's tinted glasses. I placed the letter into her mailbox myself just past midnight. A motion sensor would alert Walter the moment the box opened. Abigail wouldn't be able to resist. I knew that part of her too well, the part that always needed to be in control, to finish unfinished things, to eliminate doubt. She wouldn't send someone else. She'd come. By noon the next day, the plan was fully in motion. Walter hid the mini cameras around the barn in plain sight. Lenses tucked behind old, rusted nails, inside lanterns, even one beneath the slat of the hayloft beam. Every feed streamed to Connie's remote setup and then, through a heavily encrypted channel, to an FBI drop folder titled Whitlock Case, Live Evidence. She even created an auto trigger. Once all feeds began broadcasting, the file would start syncing and alert the bureau contact we had spoken with using a burner phone. There was no need to explain who I was or what had happened. We let the truth present itself. That afternoon, I sat in silence with Henry sleeping beside me and Grace quietly humming as she folded laundry in the next room. The hours passed slowly, tension swirling in my gut like a storm out at sea. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I was afraid of what I might see in her, what part of her I had once loved and now had to let go. Just before sunset, we moved into place. Walter and I approached the barn from the tunnel entrance. Each step down into that cold underground passageway sending echoes into my bones. The last time I had walked it, I was fleeing fire and betrayal. This time, I walked toward confrontation, calm and deliberate. Walter climbed into the loft behind a false wall he'd prepared for visibility and safety. I stood alone in the main floor of the barn, now cleaned and cleared, save for a single wooden chair facing the door. I placed another envelope beneath the chair leg, not for Abigail, for the FBI. The sun dipped low, shadows lengthened. The barn felt like it was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Footsteps, cautious, careful. A slight pause near the door, a hand pressing the old wood, creaking it open. She stepped inside. Abigail, wearing black jeans, a fitted wool coat, gloves, her hair tied back tight as always. She paused when she saw me, alive. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She simply stared, her mind clearly sprinting through explanations, calculations. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew it was too clean." I said nothing. I only looked at her. "You survived." Still, I was silent. Her mouth twitched, part confusion, part contempt. "So what is this? You want to scare me? You want to guilt me?" I motioned to the chair. She hesitated, then crossed the room and sat. Her eyes never left mine. "I came alone," she said. I nodded once. That much was true. I should have burned the tunnel. "You didn't know it existed," I replied, my voice low, even. She studied me, something in her face twitching. "Do you think this changes anything? That you being alive somehow undoes what's already happened?" "I'm not here to undo anything," I said. "I'm here to let the truth breathe." She scoffed. "You think people will believe you? A dead woman?" A mother scorned. "No, but they'll believe you when they see you." Her jaw clenched. "See me." The lights from the hidden cameras flickered on for a split second, just enough for her pupils to contract. She stood quickly. "You're bluffing." I didn't move. "Where are they? Where are the cameras?" She began pacing, eyes darting around the barn. She kicked over a lantern, pulled at the hay bales, slapped her hand against the walls. I stayed seated. "Are you recording me?" she screamed. "Is this some pathetic plea for sympathy?" I leaned forward slowly. "You always did like the last word, Abigail. So say what you need to. The people who matter are listening." For a second, something cracked in her. A flicker of rage gave way to fear. She turned on her heel and bolted out of the barn. Walter's voice came through my earpiece, quiet and steady. "All feeds stable. Transmission live. FBI confirmed receipt." Connie's voice followed. "We got her." Every second I stood, my legs heavy but sure. The barn had once been the place where they tried to end me. Now it had become the place I reclaimed myself. And the final act was just beginning. She came back, not in disguise, not with Miles, not cloaked in arrogance. Just Abigail, my daughter, walking slowly up the path to the barn, the dusk light casting long shadows behind her. Her shoulders were squared, but not in defiance. It looked more like someone preparing to confront a version of herself she hadn't spoken to in years. I stood by the open doors, letting the night air drift in and out. The same barn that once reeked of betrayal now held a strange kind of calm. There were no hidden cameras this time, no microphones, no legal traps waiting in the dark. Just two women, a mother, a daughter, one last reckoning. When she reached the doorway, she paused, her fingers brushing the wood as if confirming it was real. "You're really here," she said. "So are you," I replied. She stepped inside, cautious, looking around as though expecting someone else to emerge from the shadows. But I was alone, just as the letter had promised. Walter and Connie were far away now. This part I had asked to do on my own. I gestured to the same chair she'd used before. She didn't sit. Instead, she took a few steps closer, her face shifting through emotions she hadn't worn since she was a teenager. Confusion, guilt, something soft trying to resurface, but smothered by years of hardness. I took a breath and let the words come naturally. "You were 8 the first time you sang in this barn. Remember that?" Her eyebrows pulled together, caught off guard. "You stood on a bale of hay and declared you were going to be a singer. Your father said you were tone deaf, but you sang anyway, loud and off-key and proud." She blinked, then looked down. "I remember," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I took a step closer. "You used to call this barn your castle. Said it was where all the queens came to escape their battles. That was a long time ago," she muttered. "I still remember the way you cried when your kitten went missing." "You sat right there on that beam, and said if anyone ever hurt someone you loved, you'd never forgive them. She looked up sharply, and I saw something crack in her. That was before I learned people lie, she snapped. Before I learned love doesn't protect you. It just gives people power to abandon you. I stayed quiet. Let the words hang. She folded her arms tightly across her chest. You left me. Every time. When Dad got sick, you were never really there. When he died, you disappeared into grief and left me to deal with lawyers and paperwork and silence. I had to grow up without you, even when you were in the same house. I know, I said, and I'm sorry. Abigail's eyes shone, but no tears fell. Yet. She walked to the center of the barn, turning slowly, letting her fingers drift across the old wooden posts. You think bringing me back here will change something? No, I answered, but I wanted you to remember who you were before everything hardened. Before money, ambition, and fear rewrote who you thought you had to be. She turned back to me, and her voice cracked. You don't know what it's like to constantly feel second best. To feel like you're always being compared to Dad's expectations, to your legacy. You made me feel like I was never enough. I made mistakes, I said. I let my pain speak louder than my love. But I never stopped loving you, Abigail. Not once. The silence stretched. Then, finally, her shoulders shook. A sob escaped her lips, sudden and guttural. She pressed her hand to her mouth like she was ashamed of it. I moved to her slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry it got this far. I didn't know how to stop it. I nodded gently. But you didn't stop it. And people got hurt. She nodded too, tears now falling freely. I was scared. Miles made it all sound like it was just strategy, like we were securing the future, like it was normal to protect wealth from chaos. You made me the chaos. Her knees buckled slightly and she sat down on the old bench near the window. I didn't think you'd survive, she said, broken. I really didn't think I'd ever see you again. And what would you have done if you hadn't? I asked, softly. She shook her head. I don't know. Pretend. Carry on. Live with it. You'll still have to live with it, I said. But now you have a choice. You can spend the rest of your life running, or you can face what you did and do something different. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment she was that little girl again, the one who sang to kittens and called barns castles. Is it too late? She asked. No, I said, even though I knew redemption would never be easy or clean or guaranteed. But nothing can go unaccounted for, Abigail. The fire doesn't end just because we survived it. She nodded, slowly. I know. We sat in silence then. Not peace, not yet, but something just as honest. A pause before the final consequence. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel long before I saw the headlights. Miles never arrived quietly. He always had to announce his presence, like a king returning to his throne. Except tonight, the throne had splinters, and the queen was no longer silent. He walked in fast as if expecting a celebration or perhaps an explanation. His hair was slicked back with precision, his tailored coat brushing the dust of the barn floor as if it were beneath him. But I saw the tension in his jaw, the flicker in his eyes, when he realized it was just me, standing in the same spot where he tried to burn my name from the earth. Where's Abigail? He asked, voice sharp. She left, I replied calmly. His eyes scanned the space, searching for cameras, for traps, for ghosts. He found all three. What is this? He demanded. I stepped forward, lifting the small remote in my hand. One click, and the projector flickered to life against the back wall. A moment of static. Then his voice, his unmistakable voice, filled the air. She signs it, we take it. If she refuses, well, people lose memory all the time. One little fall. His face blanched. He lunged forward, but I stepped aside, letting the full reel play. The footage shifted, grainy clips from Walter's hidden cameras. Miles inspecting the barn days before the fire. Miles standing over the straw bales with a red gas can. Miles locking the door with mechanical precision. He turned to me, eyes wild. "You think this will hold up?" I pulled out the file Connie had printed, pages of offshore transfers, falsified documents, and a copy of the fake will. I held it all out to him. "I don't need it to hold up," I said. "I just need it to show the truth." He hesitated, lips twitching between a smirk and a sneer. Then he said it, soft and flat. "I didn't kill anyone." I just cleared the way. "For what?" I asked, my voice rising. "For your retirement plan? For your legacy? For your sick little empire built on women you think are too old, too tired, too lonely to fight back?" He said nothing, just smiled faintly, that same crooked grin he used whenever he closed a deal. "You know," he muttered, "I've met so many like you. So hungry to believe that loyalty is love, so desperate to think family means safety. It's always the same story. You hand over everything, and I simply make sure it doesn't rot." A beat, then another. And in that silence, I heard it. The low crunch of boots on gravel outside. Miles turned. "What did you do?" I raised my chin. "I let the real storytellers in." The barn doors burst open. 3 figures moved in fast. No warnings, no sirens, just clean black jackets with gold letters that didn't need explanation. FBI. One pointed directly at Miles. "Emerson Calhoun." Step away from her. Hands. Where we can see them. Miles raised his hands slowly, but his eyes stayed locked on me. He looked confused. Not scared. Not angry. Confused. "You brought the feds?" he asked. "I didn't have to," I said. "They were already watching you." For years, one of the agents spoke into her radio. Subject confirmed. Connection to Denver, Austin, and Sacramento cases. Proceed with detainment. "Wait," Miles said, panic creeping into his voice. "This is a mistake." "You're not seeing the whole picture." "We've seen enough," the agent cut in. "Forced inheritance transfers. Pattern of targeting widows and retirees. 3 prior arrests. 2 vanished plaintiffs. And now, arson, fraud, attempted manslaughter." I stood back as they cuffed him. He didn't fight. He didn't plead. He just stared at me like I had rewritten the ending of a story he thought he'd already published. "You don't understand," he said, turning toward me one last time. "I built something better than what any of you could have dreamed of. And now," I said, "you get to watch it burn." They took him out through the doors he once locked me behind. No flames this time, just justice. Cold, clear, unapologetic. And this time, I stayed standing. The courtroom was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of old wood and floor wax. Nothing grand or dramatic, just a place where lives changed in silence. Grace sat beside me on the bench, Henry curled against her chest, sleeping with the kind of peace only babies and the forgiven ever seem to have. She looked nervous, tugging gently at the hem of her blouse. I placed a hand over hers. "You're doing the right thing," I whispered. Her eyes glistened. "I just want him to be safe." The bailiff called my name. I stood, knees trembling but spine straight, and approached the judge's bench. The man behind the bench was in his 60s, white-haired and no-nonsense. He adjusted his glasses as he scanned the papers before him. "Joanna Whitlock," he began, "you are petitioning for permanent guardianship of one Henry Jude, currently under the temporary care of Miss Grace Collins. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Miss R. Collins, do you affirm that you are voluntarily relinquishing guardianship with the child's best interest in mind?" Grace stood beside me, voice soft but unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor." "Joanna is his family. She's the only one who ever fought for him." The judge paused, looking between us. Then, to my surprise, he softened a little. "I see a lot of cases like this," he said, almost to himself, "but not many with this kind of heart behind them." He turned to the clerk. "Do we have all signatures verified?" "Yes, sir. All documents are in order. Background check complete. Home inspection passed." He looked back to me. "Mrs. Whitlock, do you understand the legal responsibilities of adoption?" "I do." "Do you intend to provide Henry Jude with a stable home, financial support, and emotional care consistent with that of a biological parent?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. For as long as I live." The judge nodded slowly, then leaned forward. "Then, by the authority granted to me by the state of Oregon, I hereby approve the transfer of legal guardianship and adoptive rights to Joanna Whitlock. Effective immediately, the child shall be known as Henry Jude Whitlock." I couldn't speak. I only nodded, lips trembling. Grace let out a sob beside me, half joy, half grief. I turned and embraced her. "You'll always be part of his life," I whispered. She nodded, arms tight around me. "Thank you for giving him a name with meaning." Afterward, I held Henry in my arms as we stepped out into the sunlight. The breeze was cool, September just beginning to paint gold on the edges of the leaves. He blinked up at me, those wide, searching eyes as familiar as my own reflection. "Hello, Henry Jude Whitlock," I murmured, brushing a kiss to his forehead. "Welcome home." The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped into my mailbox between an electricity bill and a postcard from a cousin in Vermont. At first, I didn't recognize the handwriting, sharp, uneven, as though written with too much pressure. Then I saw the return address, a correctional facility just outside Portland. My hands stilled. I sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and Henry's faint breathing as he napped in his crib down the hall. I didn't open it right away. I made tea instead. I folded a dish towel. I watered the lavender by the window, watching its stems tremble in the morning breeze. Only when I ran out of small, avoidable tasks did I finally sit down, draw a breath, and open the letter. It was short, just a single page. "Mother, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. This letter isn't that my throat tightened. You don't owe me anything. Not a visit, not a word, not a reply. I just needed to say something. For myself, growing up, I thought you were made of stone. Solid, immovable, unreadable. I hated that. I thought it meant you didn't feel anything. I see now how wrong I was. I've learned what it means to sit in silence with your own reflection. I've learned how loud guilt is when there's nothing to drown it out. I think I always thought you'd be there, no matter what. Like some ancient tree I could curse and carve my name into, but one that would always be there tomorrow. I know what I did. I know what I let happen. I know I let Miles, Emerson, twist my grief and ambition into something unrecognizable. I didn't lose you when the fire happened. I lost you long before that, and I was too cowardly to turn around. I'm not writing to explain. I'm not writing to earn sympathy. I just needed you to know. You were the last person I thought of before I fell asleep last night. And the only one I thought of when I woke up this morning. Abigail. I sat still for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my fingers. It wasn't an apology. Not really. There were no requests, no desperate cries for absolution, and yet somehow it felt heavier than either of those things. I read it twice, then folded it carefully along the creases, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into the back of my recipe drawer between pages of old cornbread notes and a handwritten cinnamon roll card from my own mother. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away. That afternoon, I took Henry for a walk through the orchard behind the house. The leaves had begun their slow surrender to fall, rustling like old paper under our feet. He reached for the low branches, babbling to the breeze. I let him tug a yellowing pear leaf from a tree and watched as he tried to eat it. Somewhere behind me, the ghost of the woman I once was followed, not to haunt, but simply to witness. There would always be shadows, but not all shadows mean harm. Some simply prove the sun is still shining. And deep down, maybe I believe that one day Abigail would write again, not to be forgiven, but simply because something inside her still remembered how to reach for light. The cabin is small, just 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, and enough creaking floorboards to keep you honest with each step. But it's tucked between the evergreens like a secret someone once whispered to the wind and hoped would stay safe. Here, no one asks questions. No one knocks unless they bring pie or news of a wandering deer, the kind of place where days bleed into evenings without resistance. Grace sleeps in the room closest to the porch. She keeps a wind chime by her window now, says the sound helps her remember to breathe. Slowly. I believe her. She hums sometimes while folding laundry, something she didn't do before. As for Henry, he's claimed every inch of the living room rug as his personal kingdom. Blocks, little wooden animals, crumpled picture books. The signs of new life grow underfoot like moss. Each night after the dishes are put away and Grace has retreated with her crossword puzzles, I light the fire. Henry settles into my lap, his small back against my chest, and I tell him a story, always by the fire. It began with fairy tales, of course, dragons and brave girls who outwitted kings. But then I began to tell him real stories, not always the full truth, not yet, but the kind of truth children understand, about gardens that bloom after frost, about women who built homes from the bones of old pain, about a boy named Jude who came into the world without warning, like spring after too long a winter. Some nights he falls asleep before I finish. On those nights, I carry him to his crib, kiss the soft crown of his hair, and stand for a while watching the slow rise and fall of his breath. His room smells like baby lotion and pine. It's the smell of beginnings. Other nights, he stays awake long enough to ask questions. Was the woman scared? Did the boy find his way home? Why was the fire there? And always, I answer honestly but simply, yes, she was scared. But she stood anyway. Yes, he found a new home, one with light. The fire? The fire was where she was reborn. I don't flinch when I say it anymore. Fire used to mean endings to me. I used to smell smoke in my dreams. Used to wake with the memory of the barn's heat licking my skin, the betrayal like gasoline in my throat. Now, fire means something else. It means this hearth, where Henry leans his head against my shoulder and traces the lines on my palm with his thumb. It means warmth curling through the walls like a promise, not a warning. It means a circle of light in the middle of a dark, patient forest. Sometimes, after the stories are done, Grace joins us. She sits in the rocking chair by the fire and knits, or listens, or offers a memory of her own. Quiet things, like the way Abigail used to dance barefoot on the porch when she was 6, or how the wind tastes different when it moves through grief. No one talks much about what came before, not out of fear, but because this new chapter deserves our full attention. I still get letters. Some from old friends who heard fragments of what happened, others from strangers who read about the trial or saw a headline. I rarely reply. Some stories don't need retelling. They need planting. Let them become trees in someone else's forest. But I did keep one letter, Abigail's. I don't know why. Perhaps because there's something sacred about paper that holds the weight of a daughter's regret. Even if it was too late to change the ending of that part of the story, it was not too late to witness it. Henry calls me Gran Joe. I don't know where he picked it up, but it stuck. The first time he said it, I was shelling peas. I looked down at him, unsure I'd heard right. He said it again, then reached for another pod, his fingers clumsy but certain. He gave me a name, and in doing so, gave me back a self I hadn't realized I'd lost. We're not building a legacy out here. We're building days, simple ones. Today we baked bread. Tomorrow we might feed the birds, or paint rocks, or sit in silence and let the wind tell its own stories. I don't need more than this. Once I thought survival meant burning down the old, but now I know it means letting new things grow quietly, tenderly, from the ash. Because fire doesn't destroy everything, not if you know how to live after, and not if you have the courage to begin again beside it.